What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. As you know, I'm Fielding Shredder. Today we're working on my car to get it prepped for round 3 of Lone Star Drift. So I find myself in an interesting situation here. I have not renewed my contract with BC Racing, and I was offered to try out a pair or a set of Ceika coilovers, which, you know, are the same company that make my brakes. I love the brakes, and so I thought, why not try it out while I'm not under contract? So I've loved my BCs for years. I have nothing bad to say about them. They performed fantastic. I've had great results with them for years and years, but at this point I want to try something new. I want to try and see if I can get a little bit more performance, and Ceika makes some stuff that BC doesn't, including a set of rally coilovers, which I'm definitely going to put on a rally project in the future. So check them out here. I've got them laid out. You can see they look fantastic as always. You know, really good attention to detail on this stuff. It's all nicely powder coated and anodized as it should be. Now these are going to be as close to my BCs as possible so I could have an apples to apples comparison. And as I've mentioned on my channel, I'm not endorsing anything that I don't truly believe in. So this is an opportunity for me to give them a test. I'm not being paid for this. It's not sponsored in any way, and I'm hoping to get good results. But anything I don't like or I don't think is you know, up to par, I'm going to say so. And maybe they'll use that information to develop them in the future a little bit better. And if I completely hate them, I will tell you guys that and go back to my BCs or another company and try them out. So that's where we are right now. The spring rates are the same. We're running a 6K in the rear and a 14K up front. And these, you can see, have helper springs, which I prefer. The helper springs, as you may have seen in my other videos, help with droop travel, which is where the tire and wheel goes down lower than the ride height or the static height of the car. So we're going to go ahead and yank these crusty old dirty BCs that have been on my car for over 2 years now, and then we'll get to installing the new ones. All right, let's take a look at these old BC coilovers I've had. They have definitely need a bit of cleanup here. Still functioning fine actually, and we can see underneath the boot there's no wet residue, so the seals are still good. They're not leaking or blown, which is good. One thing I wanted to point out, which is hilarious, giant cut in this lower bucket right here, and that's from when I had a failure back here. I broke some suspension and the whole knuckle like twisted back, and the axle was rubbing on the bottom mount of the coilover, so it just kind of chewed a bit in it. But I had to keep sending it, and luckily nothing bad happened, so that's cool. Up front you can see I do have the GK Tech offset top hat. I'm not sure if I'm going to use these again, but they've worked fine and they seem to work on my setup, so might keep those, might dump them, not really sure yet. You might notice though, these don't have helper springs on them. So we are gonna change or check the ride height in comparison to the new ones, which we can see here. And basically what I have to do is take the measurement out of here and just do a little bit of math. Not a big deal. We're going for the same ride height, and then I can adjust plus or minus a little bit after. But ideally, you know, the car handles great, the alignment's really good, and it drives awesome. So I don't really want to mess with that too much. I just want to feel a little bit different dampers, and the fact that, you know, these are really old and have thousands of miles on them. Remember, these have gone through multiple drift weeks and Lone Star drift competitions, and these are brand new, so I think that they're going to be definitely a lot tighter and a lot less abused. Okay, so we've got them all laid out here. You can see we're comparing them front to front, rear to rear, and just kind of checking the differences. Now again, this has the helper spring, which is going to compress. So when we measure the ride height, the way we can do this is we essentially line up the part that touches the chassis. So it's going to be the upper mount here, and then we measure to the lower mount right here. And this one looks like roughly 350 millimeters. Then we do the same on this one. and this one's roughly 325 millimeters. But remember, this helper spring is going to compress, so we have to subtract, I don't know exactly the number, but let's go with probably 30 millimeters. So it looks like as it's sitting, 350, what was this one again? 325. So we're damn near within 5 millimeters roughly of them being the exact same ride height. So I could bolt this on right now if I wasn't swapping this over. I could bolt it on the car right now just as is and send it that way. Now, a couple things I'm noticing that I want to point out. The Ceikas have a metal slip ring right here, whereas the BCs are plastic. So plastic obviously is not quite as hard or durable. It also probably isn't quite as slippery, although I don't know that for a fact, so I can't say that that is a selling point. But I would think that the metal ones would be a little bit nicer. You can also see that the collar right here that goes in between the helper and the mainspring is also aluminum, so metal, which is nice. One thing I do wish is that the Ceika boot fit a little bit tighter, so I'll probably put a zip tie around here right now. The BC one's a little bit more rubbery. This feels a little bit stiffer, a little bit harder. It's possible that that's because these are so old and they've been weathered and used. However, I don't actually know, and I've never had a problem with them. Sliding back the piston here, we can see the thickness of the piston, and that's why I grabbed my calipers. Gonna measure that piston. 20.25 millimeters. Now let's see what it is on the BC. Basically exactly the same. .15, so same size. And I don't know, 20 millimeters is, I'm sure, what that piston's gonna be. So that's cool. Apples to apples comparison there. And if you look at the lower mounts here, we can see very subtle differences, but basically the same design. The Ceika has this brake line bracket integrated right into the lower mount, whereas this one, the BC, builds it into this brake line bracket right here. I don't know if one's better than the other. I did notice when I was messing with the BCs, this was kind of thin and it moved very easily, which I didn't like. I don't know if this will be the same. It looks like the same thickness of material. And one thing that is different though is the Ceika has a ovaled upper slot here, which gives you some camber adjustment at the knuckle side of things, whereas the BC is just a round hole, making you have all of your camber adjustment at the top. That's just a small feature, not a big deal. But other than that, the thickness of these brackets looks to be the same. And actually, I guess I can measure it, but it looks exactly the same. 420, 420, yep. So same thing there. All right, moving on to the rear here. Same sort of thing. You can notice that the lower bushing is offset on the Ceika, whereas it's even on the BC. Not actually sure why. Maybe this gives you a little more clearance from the axle. That would be a kind of a nice feature. And in terms of the lower bucket, you can see this one is much, much longer. I'm not sure how long the actual shock length is, but these are some, you know, decently long shocks from BC, but you can see my thread engagement is safe, but it's not a lot. It's about, I don't know, 30 mil or so. Yeah, 35 mil. So I don't know how much is in here, but it's definitely a lot more than 30 mil if these shock lengths are similar, which is interesting. Now I should still have plenty of ride height adjustment, I hope. So we'll see, maybe I'll take one apart and just see how long that shock is. And then again, helper springs here. The upper hat mount is a little bit different. This one is kind of like a minimalized shape. It's like a, I don't know, an octagon or a sextagon, I don't even know. This is just round. So probably no difference there in terms of performance, but maybe this one saves a little bit of weight, which is nice. One thing I did notice that I liked more on the BCs is they have this you know, adjustment right here, but it's retained on to the shock with this little nut, whereas the Ceika one, it just slips in there and you can make the adjustment, but it just kind of floats in there. So I don't know if their intention is for you to pull it out, or maybe it doesn't matter and gravity just holds it in there all the time and it's fine. But I kind of like the idea of that being held in there captive where it can't fall out. Both of them on the rear have a rubber bushing, so they're not a true pillow ball, which is fine. A little bit of rubber in there is totally okay. But up front, they are a full pillow ball, you know, Heim style upper mount with no rubber or plastic in there on both brands. Okay, I've got both rear coilovers with the lower bracket pulled off, and you can see here the BC is definitely a little bit longer, not by much, maybe by, I don't know, something like 50 mil, 2 inches. That's definitely something. It's not insignificant, but that doesn't mean the performance is automatically better. It just means that it does have a bit more travel. Now, I do remember specifically asking BC for the long travel shocks, which is what these are. I think these are the longest ones they make. And I didn't really specify with Ceika, so it's possible they make a longer version of this. I don't know. But either way, the fact that this lower mount is so much longer is nice, because now I know I have a lot more thread engagement. Whereas on this one, I only had about 40 mil or so. So that's still, like I said, safe, but certainly not ideal when you can have several inches. Or, you know, several centimeters. So, okay, I think that's all the comparisons we can make on them. They both do have a nice stamp on them that shows the build date, and that's pretty cool. All right, let's compare the wrenches now. With the BCs, you have 2 different sizes. So you really have to make sure you carry both of these at all times. The larger size goes for the larger collar and the smaller for the smaller. And if you notice, the tip of them doesn't have a whole lot of surface area to bite onto the collar, and the collars themselves have kind of a radiused edge, which I honestly don't really like. It doesn't give you quite as much, you know, leverage, and it makes it a little harder to work with. The Ceikas, on the other hand, have a nice, robust, sharp edge with a deeper groove or deeper pocket, and the wrenches themselves are identical. So that's really cool in case you lose one, or if you need to order one, you don't have to specify is it the big one or the small one. They also offer a 3/8 or maybe 1/2 inch square right there so you can put a wrench. So if you really want to wrench them on nice and tight, if it's on a rally car or an endurance car, you have that option, which is cool. These just have a hole in them, so you don't have that option there. So we'll go ahead and crack these loose. And what I'm checking now is the preload. So you really don't want any preload, in my opinion, on your setup. And so we'll give it right here. So it's completely free to move. No preload at all. Okay, I just noticed this does have a rubber upper ring. The BC's is plastic. And then metal and metal on the bottom too. Well, actually, there is no slip ring on the bottom of the rears. That's interesting. I'm not sure if that's on purpose or if that was a potential oversight, but either way, not there. So then we want to let this hang by gravity and then slowly tighten this collar until you just basically feel it touch the helper spring, and it's not really compressing it any. So then we have plenty of movement here. No real major up and down movement, but it stays within there, and it's totally, you know, loose enough to move around. Remember, the helper springs are what allow you to have that droop travel. So from here, I'm just going to basically put a 1/2 turn on this lower collar just to snug it just a little bit. We still have plenty of movement, and then I'm going to go ahead and tighten up this lower collar against it. Strong wrenches. Okay, do the same for the other side. And then when we set our ride height, now's when I'm trying to match my coilover with the other one. So the upper hats are the same thickness, so I just line those up. And then what I'm gonna do is basically run on the lower bucket mount until its hole here is even with the one on the BC. At this point, if you wanted to put some lube on here, you could. Don't use WD-40, but like something like a silicone lube. I know this is made by WD-40, but it's silicone lubricant. Will be just fine. WD-40 dries, and therefore it's not actually a lubricant, so you don't want to do that. Alright, so to line these things up, put a extension through the lower mount here, make sure the uppers are lined up, and then you get a good idea of getting them as close to even as possible. Now, here's where we could make a mistake, because I remember have the helper spring on here. So I'm gonna have to subtract that amount because it's gonna compress or lower itself that much, which is again roughly 30 millimeters. So I'm gonna actually now pull this out 30 mil. So I'm gonna tighten the collar here to where it stops on the lower mount, and then I'm gonna loosen this. Right there. So now, snug that collar. And I've got my adjusted preload set, ride height, correct coilover. So do the same for the other side, and then we'll move on to the front. All right, setting the second one's a lot easier than the first. You basically just match them. So here I'm just gonna measure between the collars, 92 mil. This one is a little bit more. There it goes. Now this is not the final adjustment or the final ride height. It's also not the final tightening of these collars. It's just the one you do on the bench, and then when it's on the car, we're gonna tighten everything up again, and I might have to make some ride height adjustments when it's on the car. No big deal. One other thing I did notice I wanted to point out that I thought was cool is on the BCs, they have this witness hole here on the lower mount, and that lets you see how much of the shock is actually in the bucket. And in this case, we're right at the minimum spec, which is pretty much the hole at the bottom of the shock. This one does, the Ceikas don't have that hole, but I'm gonna suggest that to them. Maybe they implement that into their design so that you can see, maybe they'll put a couple holes since it's such a long lower mount here. And then they could, you know, have a couple holes here to witness exactly how big it is. It does take away a tiny bit of strength, but I think it's probably fine. All right, we got these rears adjusted. It's time to go throw them on the car. Let's see how easy they are to install. So something that I think is really cool about Ceika is they are 100% custom built for you. Every single coilover that they ship, they've gone through an interview process and they've asked you about your car and they've spec'd it exactly for you. So I actually asked Cedric when he was telling me he was gonna send me these, if I could have another set just to have in stock for anyone that maybe has a car like mine that wanted to buy them. And he straight up said, no, sorry, that's not how we do business. If they want a coilover from us, then they're gonna need to call us, tell us this, you know, weight of the vehicle, the type of driving, the type of power, the size of tire, the ride height, and all sorts of different things that, you know, make it important to spec into a coilover, and then they build them custom for you. So I think that's really cool. You know, BC does offer that process, but they often just ship you a out of the shelf or off the shelf, you know, setup that may or may not work exactly for your setup. You know, that's kind of just a nice selling point. So I definitely like that about the Ceikas, and it's cool that they, you know, put their stamp on here, making sure that you know when it was built and that sort of thing. So it's built for you, pretty cool. All right, let's see how easy they install. The rears went on super smooth as expected, and everything seems to have lined up just right. You can see that I opted to put the gap on the inside, which spaced the coilover just a bit away from the suspension. Everything seems to have plenty of clearance. SPL arms are some of the fattest ones on the market, and still tons of clearance. This diameter here's nice and thin. You can see tons of clearance from, well, not tons, but enough clearance from the axle, so no problem there. So I think this is gonna be a recipe for success and probably gonna work just fine. Now let's get to the fronts. All right, so this one's gonna be a little bit different. What we'll do here is line up the upper flat surface here, because that's what touches the chassis. So that's gonna be where our starting point is. And then it goes down. Remember, helper spring here. So the way I'm gonna do this one is just come across, straight across. Remember, this is not a final adjustment, but basically I want this hole to be 30 millimeters lower than that hole. So if I go across here, intersecting the middle of that, and then I measure, so it needs to go lower. It's pretty close, maybe one more turn. So again, this is not an exact science here. It's just an approximation. I'm gonna put them on the car, and then we set ride heights. And if you were corner balancing the car, which is a great idea, especially on a race car, then these ride heights are gonna change based on the corner balance anyway, so none of them are gonna be exactly the same. We just wanna get a good solid baseline that's close to the previous ride height so that the alignment doesn't change too bad, and so that I don't have too much to adjust to get it close to where I want. All right, good to go. Let's throw them on the car. You got the nuts? Go ahead. Cool. Now's the nuts.
Do you have the 19 over there?
I got nothing. Jesus. I'll do it up here. Alright. Alright, that's all done. The reason I put the bolts in this direction is so that if I ever have to pull the caliper, it's easier to get the bolts out. And you also maybe notice that I pulled it out like this so I have the least amount of negative camber at the knuckle side, because I do have an extended lower control arm. It's already gonna have plenty of camber, and I wanna be able to make the adjustment up top. So next I'm gonna just bolt this bracket onto here, which goes right here. Nice. All right. Perfect. But yeah, super easy, went right on, nice and smooth. You know, coilovers I've installed a whole bunch of times, so it may be a little harder or easier for you depending on tools and experience, but they go on just like they should. I love this feature. This is so nice. Put a ton of leverage on it. Hell yeah.
Place your face within mine. It's all
Quick review on the Ceika coilovers. They are fantastic, and I'm not just saying that. I can honestly say that I could feel a difference in these coilovers. They feel more planted. They feel like a more stable car, almost like it's a slightly different chassis, like a better chassis, like a BMW or something. It's not super dramatic, but it is definitely apparent. And you know, I gotta say, you know, to be completely transparent, my old coilovers were great for many, many years, and they were on the car for 3 years. So they were definitely worn, they were beat, they'd gone through multiple drift weeks and stuff like that. So that's definitely a part of it. You know, brand new shocks are gonna be better. But I definitely am liking these a lot, and I'll continue to update you guys on how great they are throughout the season. But so far, Ceika coilovers give me a good thumbs up.